This is a very special night for us and for me personally, because anybody that grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s and participated in Arkansas politics came into contact with the first woman elected in her own right to the Arkansas House and to the Arkansas Senate. And over the years, her work became legendary, and her stories. And many of us, for years, tried to get her to write this book. And finally, she did. And she got to see the manuscript before she passed away. And it is a remarkable account of Arkansas politics. I had the very special honor, thanks to Richard and Mary and Stacy and Adam, to write the foreword to this book and then to deliver the eulogy at Vada Sheid's funeral. So I'm very personally connected to this, and I've loved being a part. And as I looked around and saw my buddy Carmi Henry and others who worked on gubernatorial and congressional staffs, when you worked with Vada Shed or you worked in an office, you spent half your time working on Vada Shed projects. She literally worked you to death. During the time in Senator Pryor's office, Carmi will attest to this, Vada Shed had more projects for us than the entire legislature combined. But she served her people well. It is my pleasure to begin this program. Say a couple of things. Number one, with the books for sale. Nothing personal, just politics. And they will be for sale following this presentation. And then we'll have a reception following it as well. So buy your books, visit with the family, enjoy the fellowship. But to speak first and to do the first reading, it's appropriate that that be done by the person who was probably, with the possible exception of Carl, the most important person in her life. And not only did he go into the family business at the furniture store, participate in politics, very much engaged in civic and cultural activities in north central Arkansas. But when Carl got sick and when Vada got sick, he took remarkable care. And for all the love that she gave him, he returned tenfold during those tough years as she grew old. So would you please welcome, and to talk about his mother and to read from Nothing Personal, Just Politics, would you welcome Richard Shed.
I know that everyone here a lot of y'all did not know my mother, but she loved Little Rock and loved the people of Little Rock. And I know that she would be very proud tonight to have the turnout that we've had at the reading of her book. And this book would not be possible without one lady that's sitting in the back of the room, and that's Miss Meredith Cisco, who helped me and my family write the book. And I just like Meredith to stand up, please. I'd like to introduce my wife, Mary, and my daughter, Stacy. And I appreciate everyone for coming tonight. And being from Mountain Home, you know, the best way to get to Mountain Home is not driving, it's flying. And we drove down, and I can tell you, the governor knows we all need better roads. Just like my mother always said, we need a road. But we're not here to talk about roads tonight. We're here to talk about Vada Shed. And like I say, she was a remarkable lady, and I see a lot of good friends of hers sitting here in the audience today. And you know, here I am, and through this book that started by Skip, I guess probably probably 10, 15 years ago when we first had the idea of writing a book about her life. And finally, it matured with the help of Meredith and the help of Mary and the help of Stacy and Adam and the rest of my family. I'm not going to read from the book. I'm just going to tell you a story from the book. When my mother was running for the Senate, and her district included Baxter County, which is Mountain Home, Marion County, Boone County, which is Harrison, Newton County, and she had to campaign in all these rural parts of the state. So she started campaigning one morning. She went over to Jasper, Arkansas. And Jasper, Arkansas is a beautiful mountainous terrain, small town. And she stopped by this little country store. And in this country store was a pot-bellied stove with a bunch of gentlemen sitting around the pot-bellied stove. So she walks over and says, "I'm Vada Shed, and I'm running for the state senate." And this gentleman stands up and says, "Lady, we're not voting for no woman." And so she says, "Is there any way that I could persuade you to vote for me for the state senate?" And they all kind of sat back and laughed, and they kind of looked around at each other. And they said, "Lady, I'll tell you what you can do. If you will, you see that big hole in the road next to the highway? We've been trying to get that hole fixed now for at least 3 years, and no one has been able to get it fixed. If you get that road fixed today, we'll vote for you." So she said, "Well, I appreciate it." She went back to her car or to a phone booth and called Henry Gray. And Henry, about 1:30, 2 o'clock, he had a state highway truck out there filled with hot mix and a roller behind. They rolled that down as smooth as the highway. She went out campaigning, then came back about 4:30, 5 o'clock, and walked in the door. The old gentleman sitting there around the potbelly stove said, "Lady, whoever you are, we want you to be our senator." So that's one of the stories in the book, and my wife is going to, we've got a book here, we'll let her read another story about it.
Well, I told Richard he's just like Vada. They're great storytellers, so they enjoy sharing stories. I have to say, one of the very first times I met Vada, she told me a story about a bridge. And I think this story, the reason I asked to read it was because I think it encompasses so much of what Vada was. She was a very compassionate, kind, caring person, truly cared. And although she grew up in the Ozark Mountains, she was an extremely classy lady. And I do want to share with you, I have not read in front of everybody since about 2nd grade. So Stacy and I had this conversation earlier today, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. But I think it is a great story. I had promised a bridge to a bereaved constituent, and that had needed pursuing at the point without any more delay. After all, I had given my word. The fact that I had the wits scared out of me just before making that promise had no bearing on anything except that it had gotten my attention. It was back when I was campaigning to beat Pendergrass. You remember, I had vowed to drive down every little pig trail in Baxter and Fulton counties if that's what it took to get the votes I needed. I was out tooling along a stretch of State Highway 289 near Saddle when I rounded a curve and found myself about to drive headlong into a river. Oh! A bridge was narrow, wooden-floored, and without guardrails on the high, narrow approaches to the bridge, and no signs warning about the danger waiting ahead around the bend. The curve was sharp, and I felt the car begin to go into a skid, which I knew could be deadly. Thank heavens my father had taught me well, and I downshifted as I stepped on the gas, giving myself every bit of traction that the car could do. It was touch and go. I know at least one, maybe 2 wheels left the ground as I made the curve, then eased my way onto the bridge approach. Then I was on the other side, and although my heart was pounding, I was safe. I took a deep breath, collected myself, and drove to the next house. When Jane Romine answered the door, I was still caught up in the adrenaline of the moment, and I had to tell her what happened. That bridge, it gave me a terrible fright. I thought for a minute I was a goner. Much to my surprise, the woman abruptly burst into tears. I had no idea what I'd said, but I knew it was the wrong thing. Nevertheless, It took a while before she could tell me her story. 4 years before, her 15-year-old son, Lloyd Ray, was returning home with two friends in a pickup truck. They missed the curve and went off the bridge, and Lloyd Ray was thrown under the vehicle and killed. I was horrified and outraged. I told her if I were elected to the House, I would do all in my power to see that the bridge was replaced, and I did. I may not have been able to build a bridge on Norfolk Lake, but by golly, I could make sure that that rickety bridge on Saddle was repaired. In 1970, giving way to my growing ability to make a nuisance of myself, and the Highway Commission wrote funding into their budget to build a new one. Of course, it was a lengthy process between funding and pouring concrete, but they finally poured it, and it's there. So I can, you might need this.
One of the things that bothered Vada her entire life was the fact that she did not have a college education. And it wasn't that she wasn't smart, it was just that the opportunities didn't come her way. And she felt, and she talked about feeling inferior about that. And higher education, community colleges, became a really driving force in her life and in her legislative agenda. In 1998, Chucki Bradbury was chair of the Arkansas State University Board. And ASU Mountain Home, which Chucki will talk about here in a moment, awarded Senator Vada Shed an honorary degree. And it was, as she said, one of the most greatest, proudest moments of her life when she received that degree. Chucki not only served as chairman of the ASU board, she served as chairman on the board of Mount St. Mary's Academy. She's been very active in the arts, headed up numerous things at the Arkansas Art Center. She has the Bradbury Gallery at Arkansas State, bears her name. She's not only a good friend, a mother of three, wife of Kurt, but an extraordinary citizen and one that can talk about maybe Vada Shed's crowning accomplishment even above the bridges over Norfolk, and that's Arkansas State University Mountain Home. Chucki Bradbury.
I haven't done this in a long time either, so bear with me. A few unrehearsed remarks. I was actually the first person in my family to receive a college degree, so I really knew and still know how important that is. I love ASU. Got my this little pin. I dug it out tonight, and I was very proud to wear it. Vada came from a generation of women who accomplished and achieved not because they were stridently told it was their right to do so, but because it was simply what they thought they should do. To not give of what was in her heart and mind was not an option. She was a friend to many influential politicians and business people, most of them men. And I suspect she never bargained with her gender in any of those relationships. One of her strongest and most lasting friendships was with Whit Stevens, the late. And then later, through Whit, with my husband, Kurt. Now, I did not know Vada personally, and I can tell you that that was probably a big loss on my part. I would have loved to have known her a little bit better, but I did not. Instead, I was one of the many people probably in this room and in this state who benefited from the life and deeds of Vada Shed. I happened to be on the board at ASU, as Skip referred to, when Vada decided that Mountain Home needed a two-year college. And here's the story. And it is pretty much true, I'm sure, from her side. We saw it a little differently from ASU side. But I can tell you that the last part in the book, she relates that she cried when the money was finally granted by the state for the campus. We were absolutely elated to establish that campus there. It was such good news for Arkansas State University. So it was a win-win for everyone. How it happened? She writes, "I won't pretend to have accomplished it by my wits, my courage, or my mastery of political skills, but once again, fate dealt me a sweet hand, and I played it for all it was worth. Let me tell you how it came to pass." Again, some history in order. You recall that earlier, Baxter County residents had been scared into voting down money for a college campus because of the threat that undesirables might move into the area. I had worked hard then to get an institution located as nearby as possible, and so was able to assist Harrison in getting funding to establish North Arkansas Community College in that town. In the years since, NACC had established Mountain Home as a satellite campus. The courses offered were full to overflowing. She is not overstating that, with students in many fields asking for more, so there was no question that a fully staffed local college was very much needed. The statistics were inarguable. In this period of time, State Senator Steve Leff and Representative Ed Gilbert were successful in gaining some state funding to start the NACC Mountain Home Technical College. At that time, Richard was chairman of the Baxter County Higher Education Advisory Board. Harrison's NACC campus and Mountain Home Technical College were considering merging, but were at odds over the number of board members from each county. Can you imagine that happening? Yeah. One afternoon, Richard and his very good friend, businessman Freddie Blackburn, called Gene Smith, who at that point had been president of ASU for probably 15 years. He really knew the ropes. And he knew a golden opportunity when he heard it on the other end of the phone. Freddie asked Gene Smith if ASU would be interested in NACC Mountain Home becoming part of ASU. There's no way to overstate the importance of Freddie's support in this effort, for although he often worked behind the scenes, he was one of the hardest fighters to keep the Mountain Home program afloat as we struggled for our own academic legitimacy. They must have made their case, because the next day, Gene was on his way to Mountain Home to meet with the advisory board. I actually remember the day the call was made, and Gene Smith was so excited, he called everyone on the board. So it was a very important day for everyone. Arkansas State would love to have Mountain Home be a part of their system. The board, of which I was on at that time, voted, and ASU Mountain Home became a reality. So in 1993, I began working, not me, Vada, to get funding approved to establish a viable college in Mountain Home. There was no room in that year's budget, and state funds were very tight. Sounds familiar. So my attempts went nowhere. I just kept chipping away at the problem, and in the course of my chipping away, I managed to get on a first-name basis and then to become friends with Arkansas's budget director, Mike Storms. One afternoon, while discussing a number of legislative issues with him, he let slip very casually that the upcoming 1994 budget cycle might not actually be as tight as everyone thought. So, he cautioned me not to get my hopes up, but said there was a real possibility that if I had a bill in the works, it could get funded, even if it only made the C list. And I'm assuming you all are kind of familiar with those politics and know what that C list is. That's the dead list for the most part. I didn't say a word to any of my fellow legislators. I just went quietly back to my office and drew up another bill and just as quietly introduced it. That bill would fund a branch campus of Arkansas State University in Mountain Home. They laughed at me, knowing it wouldn't get funded, but they passed it, likely out of kindness to an old woman who didn't know better than to ask the impossible. But you see, I knew better. They might have thought they were just humoring an old lady who sometimes dozed off in particularly boring committee meetings. But when it came down to the crunch, here's who caught who napping. When the budget numbers came out, to nearly everyone's surprise but mine and a certain budget director's, many items in Category C got their money. And because Mountain Home had never, ever received any funding for higher education, guess what? It was at the top of the list. We remember that real well. And received just over $1.2 million. I guess there was a little life in the old girl yet. That funding was used to purchase the lovely 80-acre tract where now resides the campus of Arkansas State University Mountain Home. It was our seed money, and so our little college, so long a dream, that day became a reality. I was so happy, I cried. Today, Arkansas State University Mountain Home is one of the most beautiful college campuses in the South, with its architecture inspired by that of the University of Virginia. And truly, if you've made the trek to Mountain Home, it is absolutely a stunning campus. Much credit should be given to Dr. Ed Coulter, his late wife, Fran Coulter, and Vice Chancellors Lyndall McCurley and Pat Bailey, who were instrumental in the creation of this charming campus. That's the story.
How many in this room have been to the ASU Mountain Home campus? About half. You ought to go. Chucky's right. It's absolutely beautiful. Another beautiful part of, that's kind of echoing back here, another beautiful part of the state, in that part of the state, is Mammoth Spring State Park. And guess whose hands, footprints were all over that one? In the process of her work in getting that state park established, she worked on the development of that with a young person who had just started his career with parks and tourism. He happened to be a college classmate of mine. He happened to move up the ranks to be director of parks and tourism. And those of you that know and have been around Richard Davies know not only is he a class act, a great parks director, but he may be Arkansas's best storyteller. And his stories about what happens in the state parks are legendary. He's got a couple about Vada Shed. Ladies and gentlemen, Richard Davies.
I look around the room and half my college classmates are here. Richard and I were fraternity brothers. Skip and I were both journalism majors. It's amazing we made a living. I've got to tell you, Skip was very nice about how he discussed Vada and how much work she passed out. I'll be dead honest, Richard, we'd hide from her. If you saw Vada coming, she was like my mother, the English teacher. You knew she had something for you to do. I had a grandmother who used to say something like, "You can do this while you're resting." Well, that's how Vada was. She always had something lined up. This story starts back, actually, before I started. This was in the late 60s. And to set the stage, the state park system, when Dale Bumpers was elected governor, he described us as a statewide embarrassment. And he and that guy right over there, David Pryor, pulled us out of that hole. But when this story starts, there wasn't much money. There wasn't much anything going on. And so I'll tell you the story. One more thing to sort of set the scene. Has anybody been to Mammoth Spring? In the old days, Mammoth Spring was a lake, and there was a dam way off where the water finally got out. But when you went to see it, it's like looking at a bathtub that fills up from the bottom. It's like, where's the spring? It was just a lake. And so she talks about that problem, and I can remember that. So here's the story from Vada on Mammoth Spring State Park. One more thing, and I told Skip this. I went to work for a guy named Bill Henderson, straight out of college in the Army, who was the department director. The very first assignment he gave me was go find Vada Shed and help her write this speech she wants to write about the future of Baxter County. Hell, I didn't even know where Baxter County was. She helped. I wish I could find that speech, Richard, to see how right she was. But okay, Mammoth Spring State Park. Up in the extreme northwest corner of my district in Fulton County was an area that had great potential as a scenic attraction. In fact, it had been designated as a state park. Most people now know Mammoth Spring as a beautiful, splendid, scenic wonder. It is possibly the world's largest freshwater spring with a daily flow estimated at 36 million gallons. It is the source of the beautiful Spring River. When I came into office, most people didn't even realize what it was. The spring was bubbling up in the bottom of a large, shallow lake, so you couldn't see where the water was coming from. Some people came to fish, but nobody would make the trip just to see the spring. At that time, there just wasn't that much to see. The state became involved in the site in 1966, when what was then called the Parks and Publicity Commission spent $55,000 to buy part of the land around the spring. It obtained a 25-year lease on the rest, including a 30-acre tract that contained the spring's outlet. The lease was a problem. The first version they signed contained restrictions on what could be done with the land, and those restrictions included a prohibition against any lodging, camping, or playground facilities within 800 feet of the lake. So much for developing the site as a tourist attraction. Well, they backtracked and renegotiated and got those restrictions lifted. The next thing needing to be done was to come up with an overall development plan for the site so that we could make it as beautiful as we knew it could be. This is where I came in, and although I managed it about as badly as anything I've ever done in the legislature, I managed to pull it through. You see, I had promised during my campaign in 1966 I would work toward the park's development. In exploring the issue, I learned that if the legislature would appropriate $25,000 toward development, the agency that would become the Parks, Recreation, and Travel Commission could get $75,000 in matching development funds from the federal government. Unfortunately, with incredible short-sightedness, in my opinion, the Commission, in its budget appropriation request, hadn't asked the General Assembly for a dime to spend on any park development, not only for 1969, but for 1970 as well. I busied myself making contacts. Well, I can see this happening. And soon I had what I thought were enough commitments that the funds would be added to the budget. I was further encouraged by hearing that Senator Clarence Bell of Parkin was also asking for a similar $25,000 for development planning at what is now Village Creek State Park. That's between Forest City and Wynn, if you all have not been there. He was working on the Legislative Council for his project while I was busy lobbying each member for support of funding for Mammoth Spring. We thought they couldn't help but see the wisdom in what we were doing. We, of course, were wrong. When the Council sent its recommendation to the Joint Budget Committee, where it would be voted on by the legislature, it contained exactly what the Commission had originally requested, nothing more, nothing. I was more than disappointed. I was heartsick. Moreover, I felt betrayed by my own colleagues. I might have expected that, as a woman in the midst of all these men, I might not be taken seriously, but then there was Senator Bell. What possibly could have gone wrong? I didn't know, but I was determined to find out. I can see that too. I went in search of someone I knew who was on the council, and I found Lacey Landers of Benton. I was so upset. I don't know exactly what I said to him. I know I used the word double-cross more than once. But worse, I was furious at my failure to bring this home for the people who had sent me to represent them, that I did something I'd never done before and have never done since in the political arena. I cried. I couldn't help it. The tears just welled up, and whether Lacey really heard me or he just didn't know what to do with the crying legislator, he took up my cause. You're right, he said, we did promise, and this isn't right. We need to do what we said we'd do. 2 days later, he repeated those words before the council and then moved to recall and reopen the commission's reappropriation bill and add the $50,000, stipulating that the first year of the appropriation, $25,000, would go to Senator Bell's Park, and the second year, the remaining $25,000 would be allocated to Mammoth Spring. It was one of those moments I'll never forget, being able to deliver on that promise. It would never have happened without Lacey, though. They would have gone through the budgeting process without a single thought to their promises to me, or that we have cost the people of my poor, struggling little corner of Arkansas. If he hadn't called them to be accountable, I tell you, if the whole legislature were made up with people like Lacey Landers, it would be a far better place. That wasn't the end of it, though. At the Joint Budget Committee meeting, we tried to get them to up the amount. I can see that, too. Foreseeing the development plans were complicated, it would be hard to complete the funding available. They wouldn't go for it. Then, to make matters worse, the state parks director, whose name I don't recall now, was ousted, and the commission decided they just might be able to find a better use for the funding already appropriated for Mammoth Spring. Can you see this one happening? This time, I wasn't going to put up with their shenanigans. I went around to every member of the Joint Budget Committee and asked them to sign an unofficial petition reminding the commission that when the money was allocated, it had a specific purpose, and that purpose was for Mammoth Spring. They were caught. Mammoth Spring State Park was underway. It took 10 years, but the State Parks Division completed a development program at the park costing a total of $486,223. Many others helped me make this beautiful park a reality, including Mammoth Spring City Attorney Bill Haas Sr., Mayors Orville Swope and Tom Freeman, local business owner Jim Miller, and from across the line in Missouri, Oregon County Presiding Judge Dorothy Ellis. An island was constructed around the spring, exposing the outlet for the first time. Water flowing from the spring basin goes down natural-looking splashways and rocks into a lake, reveals the volume of the water coming out of the ground. Arched bridges, a berm, and other features were also added. A separate appropriation funded an adjacent tourist information center. The Mammoth Spring Garden Club has donated countless dollars and hours to improving the grounds and converting part of the old Frisco Railroad Depot into a museum. I'm proud to be a part of it. Well, that's the end of Vada's story. Mammoth Spring is now the only national natural landmark in the state of Arkansas, and the Mammoth Spring Visitor Information Center has the highest visitation of any other than those on the interstate in the whole state. So, Vada, thanks.
If there was or is anyone who enjoyed being in the legislature as much as Vada Shed did, it is our next speaker. And as I have said, he's the only good thing that ever happened in my mind about term limits, because he might still be there if we didn't have term limits. But I think it's fair to say that during the first 2 years of his tenure as governor, some great things have happened in our state. And certainly the spirit of this state is uplifted to a very high degree. He served in the state senate with Vada Shed. Ladies and gentlemen, 45th elected governor of Arkansas, the Honorable Mike Beebe.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, one of the things that we often overlook is the fact that people put this together and that people encourage an environment that allows this kind of activity. With all due respect to years gone by, there weren't a number of happenings, such as the reading of an autobiography of a state senator in a setting that fosters thought, debate, education, and interest in Arkansas history and in Arkansas politics. And this is merely one of many, many events held in this facility and authored and sponsored by Skip Rutherford. So, Skipper, thank you. I think if you've learned one thing, if you didn't know Vada, and if you did know, you've been reinforced with one thing about her. If you wanted to describe her in one word, it was persistent. And she would tell you that. I often think that she fostered an image that would cause people to underestimate her, and that she would do that on purpose to throw them off guard. only to spring the trap later in the fashion that has been described in a couple of these anecdotes and some of these writings that have been recited. I found it to be that way because my first initial impression, even as a freshman senator, some people said I was cocky as a freshman senator. I'm sure they were wrong. But even as a freshman senator, I underestimated her for the first few weeks. It took just a few weeks to figure out that that was part of her charm and part of her style. And she indeed was that persistent person that if she ever grabbed onto something, she would hold on to it until somebody hollered uncle. I'm reminded of the Jerry Clower story when he told his friend to shoot up here amongst us when he was up in that tree fighting with that raccoon, because he said one of us got to have some relief. And that's about the way it was with Vada. You gave up, you gave in, and you gave what she wanted because she was persistent. Never for herself. Always for her people. In the Senate, it would take a while to learn the ropes, but I was getting plenty of help. The other members seemed to go out of their way to offer assistance and to make me feel comfortable, but neither did they spare me the traditional initiation rite. I'd been a senator less than a week when my first bill came to the floor, and I had to go to the well to explain it. Senate Bill 6, I explained politely, would allow regional water districts to issue revenue bonds that would mature in 40 years instead of the current legal limit of 30 years. The Carroll Boone Regional Water District needed the change to help it finance construction of the water line that was to bring water from Beaver Lake east through Eureka Springs, Berryville, Green Forest, and finally to the Harrison area into my district. The roll call started, and to my astonishment, every senator voted no. But then I saw the merriment behind their straight faces, and I jumped into the act, voting yes, not only for myself, but for the absent seatmate and fellow freshman, Senator James Teague of Benton. When it was over, I was soundly trumped, getting just 4 votes out of 35. 8 of those had the grace to decline to vote at all. But then a nice thing happened. Senator Morris Henry of Fayetteville stood and asked the chair to recognize him. He moved to expunge the vote and asked that we vote again. This time the bill passed 35-0. They congratulated me on my initiation, and I returned to my seat. I'm sure I was grinning like a fool. They didn't hold it against me, though, and a few weeks later, on February 14th, 1977, Senate business came to a halt when Max Howell rose and on behalf of them all presented me with a large heart-shaped box of candy. I still remember him standing there, his arms outstretched. "This is to let you know that you are the Valentine of the Senate," he said. It may have been unseemly behavior for a senator, but I had tears in my eyes. Even with their kindness, it took a long time to become comfortable in that august body, and I don't think I ever fit there as well as I had in the House. In fact, I believe had I stayed in the lower house, I'd have been Speaker eventually, but we never get to see that road not taken, do we? I had my road, and I'd have to get down it the best I could. One more passage that they asked me to read, and it's in a portion of the book called Calling in Favors. So we went, arriving in Washington the day before our scheduled appointment. There we ran into a brick wall. Its name was John McClellan. He was in a bad mood when we got to his office, fuming over some cartoon in the Baxter Bulletin that he thought had portrayed him unkindly. And he had decided on the perfect way to show them a thing or two. He was going to oppose his own bill. The more we talked, the more pig-headed, I guess I can safely say that now, he became. Turning aside every argument in favor of the bridge and finally asserting nastily that what we thought didn't matter. "You can't get that bridge without me," he snarled and walked out, leaving us in shock. I couldn't believe it. All our efforts stood in ruins at the feet of the man who should have been our greatest ally. We literally didn't know where to turn. Then, as we were walking down the corridor of the Senate office building, Clyde Ellis came out of an office nearby and beckoned me to him. within sight but out of hearing of the others, Ellis, my hero, handed me the key, literally. "Don't give up," he said. "This is the key to the senator's office. You be here at 7:30 in the morning in his office. He always feels better in the morning. And your chances of getting something positive from him on the bill will be much better then. Don't give up." All the time he was talking, I was shaking my head. It was a crazy thing to do. What if we were accused of breaking into his office? It was too daring. Then I heard myself saying, "I'll do it." I snatched the key out of his hand before I had a chance to think twice. "Good girl," he said with a grin and a wink. Then he walked off, leaving me shaking in the warm June afternoon. I was afraid to confide in Bumpers. I knew he would put a stop to it. I only told Henry Gray, and he volunteered to go with me. He in turn told Highway Commissioner Chairman Maurice Smith, who thought it was worth a try. I wish you'd been there with us to see McClellan's face when he walked in his office and found the three of us, me, Gray, and Smith, sitting and waiting for him. He uttered an expletive. And I thought it best we hasten to explain. "We came to make one last plea, Senator, for you to go with us to the committee meeting and speak for the bridge bill." I used my sweetest voice. He glared at us without speaking and shuffled over to his chair. When he was seated, he shook his head. "I don't like that Baxter Bulletin paper," he growled. "I don't like its editorial cartoons. They're mean." So that was the burr under his saddle. I knew the cartoons he was talking about. I'd seen them, and I agreed with him. The Bulletin had come down hard on the side of Pryor in his challenge to McClellan, and they hadn't been nice about it. So what could I say? But, "Senator," I pleaded, "that newspaper speaks only for itself. I don't have any control over what they print." "Yes, but looky here. Baxter County didn't even support me in the election. They went the other way." I sighed. He was right again. But that was beside the point. It was time to get serious. "That's true, Senator, but Carl and I worked hard for you. We contributed heavily to your campaign as much as we could. We have been your friends, and friends are supposed to help each other and support each other. I need your help. I need your help for my people." Well, to say he was won over instantly would be overstating it. We kept talking, and I began to wonder where everyone was. I looked at my watch. It was a little after 8. Then I heard Ellis's voice, then Goodman, and finally Bumpers. They were going to have a fit when they found out what we'd done, especially if I walked out of there empty-handed. The second time I looked at my watch, McClellan saw me do it. He glared at me again. "All right, Vada. All right, you'll get your bridge, but not until I get my money for the new Veterans Hospital. That's got to come first." I was so stunned I nearly forgot to thank him. Then I looked him square in the eye. "I thank you, Senator. My people thank you."
The winds of winter weren't yet over when I realized that 1984 was going to be a year in an election like one I'd never faced before. The teachers were still on their tirade. The Republican Party was geared up and ready to take me on, and they had more ammunition than I would have believed possible. Again, Carl was the one who was the first to see what was happening, and he explained it in words that hurt, even if they were true. "You built the road so people could get here. They got here. They all liked it. They moved down from up north to retire, and almost every damn one of them is a Republican." What hurt, this is the campaign, what hurt and offended me most was something they were making fun and ridicule of, something no Hill woman would ever have needed explained to her. They were making fun of the very notion that a woman could be an effective leader in state politics. It couldn't happen, therefore I hadn't done it. I was just a silly woman, nagging at the men's coattails, and batting my eyes, ineffectual, out of touch, and over the hill. What's worse, if they wouldn't look at or acknowledge my record, what could I say in my defense? For heaven's sakes, were those bridges invisible? Well, of course I worked behind the scenes. Of course I batted my eyes and looked helpless when I was trying to get the men of the legislature and the Congress and the White House to pass the bills and acts my people needed. What the devil else was I to do? For a few short intervals, I was the only woman in the game. There was no way they were ever going to take me seriously. Cared that they did what I needed done. If I had to cajole, flatter, simper, pretend helplessness, pretend to be a damn lunatic, it didn't matter. I wasn't there to make myself a power broker. I was there to get things done. So I did what I had to do. I played the game of politics, and I played it well. Just ask Senator Pryor, who had said, quote, I learned early on that whatever Vada asked you to do, you might as well go ahead and do it, because if you didn't, she'd come back and ask you every day until you did. I think with that, ladies and gentlemen, I do want to ask, because he RSVP'd at the last minute, but we can't let a session like this go and stories about Vada Shed go without introducing and welcoming to the podium State Representative, Congressman, Governor, Senator, and Dean David Pryor.
Wow. Thank you. Gosh, thank you, Skip. I'm totally surprised here, and thank you, and Governor, thank you, you and Ginger, for being here, and all of you. Skip, this is wonderful. Isn't this a great opportunity to come like this? Wow. There's so many Vada stories, and I've not seen the book, but there's a story that I've heard about, and it may or may not be true, and it may be in the book, and just because it's in the book doesn't make it true, I want you to know. No. But I heard a wonderful story about political resiliency that was attributed to Vada, and an opportunity that she had to be accosted by several of her constituents one Saturday morning in Mountain Home. And she had been invaded, or her store, her furniture store, had been invaded by several angry constituents wanting money for the highways up in Baxter County in North Arkansas. And Vada was literally cornered over around the window, the front window to the store. And as she looked out and trying to figure out how she's going to answer this horde of angry constituents who had backed her up to the window, demanding that she produce this money for the highways, she happened to look out at that moment. Unbeknownst to her, Henry Gray, Director of Highways, had come to Mountain Home that weekend to go fishing. He was walking literally in front of her store, and she rapped on the window. She saw him and says, "Come in." And he says, "Come in." Henry Gray walks in the back of the furniture store, the Director of Highways, and I must say he was one powerful individual. In fact, Dale Bumpers and I were on a plane one time with Henry Gray and the Highway Commission, and the plane was kind of sputtering, and Dale punched me and says, "If this blanketed plane goes down, the headline will say, 'Highway Commissioners plus 2 unknown individuals go down with it.'" It was that powerful and that important. But Henry walked in the back of the furniture store, unbeknownst to what is happening, and Vada announced to the crowd of angry constituents, "Ladies and gentlemen, the reason I have invited Mr. Henry Gray here this morning is because he wants to tell you about the state of the highway funding
for Baxter County. Of course, Henry Gray had to promise whatever they were wanting that particular morning. But that was Vada. It was, in fact, the late Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House, who I had the pleasure of serving with, who said that all politics is local. I think with Vada, if I may say this and be presumptuous probably in saying this, with Vada, all politics was personal. It was one-on-one. It was looking someone in the eye. It was cajoling. It was compromising. It was saying, I'll do this, you do this for me. But with Vada, it was a life. And it was a rich ritual that she practiced every day, and she was, as she said, good at it. I don't know of anyone who was better at it than Vada Shed. I don't know anyone who loved it more or who did more to basically elevate the level of feeling for politicians and politics and government than Vada Shed, State Senator Vada Shed, the only woman that Arkansas has ever had, I think the first woman who was elected first to the House of Representatives and then to the state Senate. She was one of a kind, and I'll tell you, she made our life better. I think that she would like being here tonight at the Clinton School of Public Service, because public service was what she was about. Public service was her life. Public service was her dream. Public service is how she reached out and did things for her constituency, the people that she loved and the people who loved Vada Shed. Thank you so much.
Okay, now we're going to line up to buy this book. The first time it's been sold. And we have refreshments and reception at the back. I might make one announcement. Speaking of books, you know, obviously those of us who love David Pryor, I had two goals in my life. One was to get Vada Shed to write a book, and the other has been to nag David Pryor into doing the same thing. And I want you to know that this fall, a Pryor commitment will be published. Thank you all. Have fun.